Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another session of Masterclass. And today we've got a very interesting topic. It's investing in gold and silver in this Dhanteras. So, first of all, Deepak ji and all our viewers, very happy Dhanteras. What a wonderful time to be. Deepak ji,
It is indeed, Neeraj. It is the time of festivities and it is the time of being with family. I think we are all looking forward to this weekend and then one Monday on, and I think then a couple of days of the grand Diwali festivals will start.
fantastic. So, guys, before I start very quickly, I'd like to read the disclaimer for this event. Investment in securities market are subject to market risk. And read all the related documents carefully before investing. All the presentations, discussions, content are purely educational in nature and are in no way an advice or recommendation. For more information, please visit our website for complete disclaimers. Now, it's a great pleasure to have today as my guest Mr. Deepak Yadav. He's the head of passive business, Aditya Birla Sun Life Mutual Fund. And today, the topic that we are going to talk about is investing in gold and silver. I think I was just looking at a chart, last 2, 3 months. What a phenomenal one sided rally in gold. Can't believe what a rally in silver. So, how do you see the situation? Many people are a little bit confused. In fact, people are very bullish about gold and silver. So, tell us the whole story. Why such a powerful rally and how the future look like? I can't hear your voice.
Gold and silver, I think.
Perfect.
Any better? Am I audible now?
Absolutely.
All right, perfect. So I think कुछ latency issue था. All good. So to answer that question, I think there are many layers. I think we as a country have had both the appetite for gold for generations and silver as well, in fact, for generations. So for us, it is personal, it is linked to this festival, and it is an evergreen theme that has been there with our families for decades together now. Now, what we've seen in the last year and a half in particular for gold speaks to the value of gold from a global investment landscape. The demand for gold from central banks in particular has been very strong. Now, some of the fundamental drivers are कि जब भी volatility बढ़ती है market में, जब लोगों
Mhm.
की anticipation होती है कि आगे जाके volatility बढ़ेगी, तब typically gold का demand spike होता है. Since Trump has taken over, we've seen the US markets have hit some highs, they've hit some lows. It's been a distinctive ride, in a manner of speaking. But I think the investor appetite for stability is very much there. And at the end of the day, when you have this kind of a bumpy road, organically people look to move towards a safer haven asset, something that can protect them from inflation, something that can protect them from currency shock, something that can withhold any major downturn in the equity markets in particular. So I think that is why we are seeing the demand for gold from an investment franchise. And as I said, a similar demand also coming from central banks, which has been rising for almost 2, 3 years now. And we see consistent buying from some of the leading central bank, including ours. And that is driven by the fact that I think dollar reserves had become or have been the stronghold of central banks for almost decades now. But with the dollar debt rising post pandemic, with the US rates also changing a bit more sharply of late, there is a keen or an acute sense across central banks to diversify. At the end of the day, central bankers are not entirely averse to diversification. While they would like to hold the most stable and most tradable of assets, which is dollars, but to a degree, gold enjoys its own value. So we see central banks buying, we see investors buying, and organic demand for jewelry remains. So I think this is what has really propelled the gold market in particular. On silver, it is somewhat different. While silver is also a precious metal, the demand source is not entirely the same. Its usage on the industrial side is the predominant driver of demand, controlling over 50% demand. What has really flipped in the last year is that there's a very strong sense of demand globally from the investment fraternity as well, which means कि just have in a simple parlance, I think in India we've been exchanging silver coins on Diwali for years as a value of as a store of value. But I think globally silver was not enjoying the same traction for a few years now. It's been 2 or 3 years almost since when silver ETFs in particular, which is the leading investment channel for silver globally, they had been seeing outflows. And I think in 2025 that narrative has also changed very meaningfully. While there wasn't as much demand from investment, the industrial demand was definitely taking silver or making the price kind of tick upwards. But with the investment demand coming back, I think that has now taken a shape of its own. So there is a structural change at play. Incidentally, earlier this year, the US government also added silver to its or kind of increased the stature of silver in its metal list in terms of how they will transact on it, how they'll imply duties, export, import, etc. They want to have a higher reserve of silver after many decades. And this is to do with the fact that we are in an environment where effectively precious metals are clearly in demand, but the demand for key metals coming out of the demand of batteries, solar, etc., is driving a lot of the metals forward. And silver is a key metal there. And it's also, as I said, it ends up being a partner or an ally to gold in a lot of these situations. So the demand for silver also, after 4 or 5 years now in deficit, the deficit is now compounding because the investor demand is also now compounding. So silver has also been on a tear of late.
Absolutely. Again, आपने कहा कि last year we have seen that central banks really started buying very aggressively. Currently, actually, one of the key factors, as you said, is geopolitics, right? Right. De-dollarization. Do you think, given this context, ये डिमांड गोल्ड का डिमांड और बढ़ने वाला है, द प्राइसेस और बढ़ने वाला है, सिल्वर का प्राइसेस नाउ इफ एन इन्वेस्टर डू यू थिंक it is the right time again to get into it? That is the many questions who have missed the rally probably thinking in their mind कि मुझे इन्वेस्ट अभी करना चाहिए क्या?
I think answer it's never a bad time to invest in gold, and for that matter, it's always a decent time to invest in silver also because principally they protect. So अभी जैसे हमने बात की एक सेकंड पहले कि थोड़ा
हाँ जी.
जियोपॉलिटिकल टर्मोइल ज्यादा है, but even in this geopolitical turmoil, the rupee has weakened slightly. Elements like that, to a degree, always buffer the returns of gold for Indian investors, that they provide a currency agnostic channel. And this is not just true for India, anywhere globally. It's a commodity that effectively acts as a currency of its own. And hence it is not as subjective to what is happening between two countries, any two countries, or for that matter, in any part of the world. The organically we are not likely to see this kind of performance for the year ahead. But definitely, what has surprised, I think, a lot of us on the investment fraternity is also कि इतने strong returns आए हैं जो project I don't think हम में से भी कोई कर रहा था. For example, you take World Gold
Right.
Council, which is a leading surveyor on how gold is expected to do, and you take Silver Institute, which holds the same regard on the silver side. Both these hallmarked institutes had not forecasted this kind of a return journey. And while returns had been marked as positive, the return journey speaks for itself. So I think we are witnessing a structural change here with increasing demand. And even silver is now getting a little bit of demand from central banks after many decades together, where central banks were either reducing or, in fact, had no silver. So I think structurally, both these metals are now at the forefront of a transition where people want that degree of diversification, given the lower correlation with equities and given the very strong performance of equities. And I know in some of us in the last year in India in particular, हम लोग को लगता नहीं है कि equity market चले हैं. But by and large, अगर हम pandemic से average देखें तो equity markets काफी अच्छे चले हैं. Last year might not have been the same and definitely has not been the same, but even as a 4, 5, 6 year average, when you look back, you've seen a stronger CAGR than the decade before. So I think when you put
Mhm.
that into perspective and you realize that, okay, maybe the world is reshaping into a slightly multipolar economy where there are different power centers, each with its own independent agenda, I think the demand for gold and silver structurally is coming from there. In silver's case, also the green energy transition that we are witnessing, the offtake of EVs and pharma, almost across the board of use of silver, where it is a reasonably inert metal with strong conductivity, I think it comes in very handy. Even towards, let's say, the push towards AI, as you need more chips, silver is very easily and organically used in chip manufacturing as well. तो जो मल्टीफेसेटेड यूज है सिल्वर का वो भी एक काफी इंपॉर्टेंट एलिमेंट है सो मोर देन स्टोर ऑफ वैल्यू आई थिंक द industrial demand slowly rising and the limited availability of both of these metals is kind of now propelling that investment narrative that it's not too late to come. But yes, definitely somebody who's coming in now should think of the fact कि I probably need to hold on to this. This will provide me good diversification. This will provide me a good inflation hedge, but it might not be the best performing asset class in the next 6 months. If the geopolitics continues to evolve the way it has even in the last week, it could probably surprise us all and continue to be at the forefront of returns. If things cool down, probably it will take a step back. But in a manner of speaking, it is never a good time or a bad time to come in gold and silver. They're both perennial in nature. They've been there since before our time, or definitely before my time. And
Absolutely.
I think they have proved their mettle in that regard that they are stable, they are steady. There are periods where they might compound at 7%, 6% for 2 or 3 years, but then there are also periods where the decadal returns will start to look like 13, 14, 15%. So I think yes, we are at a place where they are both at their all-time highs. But I think the structural changes could continue to propel them further from these all-time highs further ahead. And yes, immediate, let's say, cool off in all kind of tensions could also kind of lead to a meaningful cool off there. But I think the way things are sitting, Neeraj, थोड़ा तो अभी think अभी time है before things do stabilize. And I think just the last 2, 3, 4, 10 days performance also speaks for itself that the investment appetite is not gone. And there is only limited amount of these metals out there today.
करेक्ट मैं वैसे जब गोल्ड वाज 40,000 लेवल पे था और लोग कहते थे कि और कितने ऊपर जाएंगे मतलब as 10 years back 10 12 years 15 years back there was a massive rally again time to time so लोग उस टाइम पे भी so high value at that point of time high price now recently it crossed 1 lakh rupees people are thinking now it is 1 lakh 30 plus so as you said yes there are so many things नाउ अगेन जब हम लोग सोचते हैं गोल्ड में इन्वेस्ट करने के लिए so gone are the days कि I'm going to buy physical gold right there are so many alternatives are available so you being in the industry and veteran and expert so what is your best suggestion because ultimately देखिए ज्वेलरी के लिए तो ठीक है जो लिया था वो है but most of the people want to invest as an investment so what is the best form of investment for gold
So there are multiple forms available today. And I think predominantly on our side as AMCs, we are offering it in two formats,
uh-huh.
ETFs and FOFs.
Mm-hmm.
ये हमारे दो फॉर्मेट हैं इनफैक्ट ETF as probably the audience knows otherwise is exchange traded funds एंड
Correct.
FOF जो स्ट्रक्चर होता है वो फंड ऑफ फंड हम लोग उसको कहते हैं वो टिपिकली एंड दिस इज ट्रू फॉर मोस्ट AMCs आई एम नॉट श्योर इफ देयर इज एनी एक्सेप्शन अभी तो मुझे ऐसा लगता है कोई एक्सेप्शन नहीं है कि वही ETFs को पकड़ते हैं और उसी ETF के ऊपर एक स्ट्रक्चर है जो बेसिकली म्यूचुअल फंड फॉर्मेट में या इंडेक्स फंड फॉर्मेट में अवेलेबल हो जाता है तो
Mm-hmm.
फॉर ट्रेडिंग इन ETFs आपको डीमैट अकाउंट लगेगा and you need to a degree access and understanding of trading on screen to kind of interact with the ETF because it is an exchange traded fund. For an FOF, the format is even simpler. As we've been doing for decades as families, it is available as a classic mutual fund. You can do a classic SIP into it. You can subscribe through it through digital channels, through distributors, directly with the AMC. So there are multiple channels in the classic format as well. And I think both these formats come with their own merit. ऑर्गेनिकली जब आप एक्सचेंज ट्रेडेड फॉर्मेट की बात करते हैं तो वो इंट्राडे ट्रेड होता है. So there's a little bit of that volatility in the day. You need to be comfortable in terms of coming onto the screen and kind of making that transaction. And if you prefer a more steady format where you are not having to think twice about kind of transacting and are looking for a stable standardized value for everybody who's coming and going out, the FOF format amply does justice. So I think access channel की बात है. Both formats come with their own minor differences. There's a ever so slight difference in the FOF कि वहाँ पे because FOF आपका ETF को ही hold करता है, तो आपकी it ends up being marginally more expensive. But as I said, rather than the costing bit of it, which is a smaller element, the ease or the convenience that makes sense for you as an investor, I think should be the decision-making factor here.
Okay. Now, either you can choose ETF or fund of fund. Now, ideally, एक पोर्टफोलियो में आपने थोड़ा देर पहले बोला था कि एक एसेट एलोकेशन गोल्ड एंड सिल्वर गोल्ड होना चाहिए पोर्टफोलियो में. आइडियली हाउ मच परसेंटेज होना चाहिए? और सिल्वर नाउ बहुत सारे लोग थिंक अबाउट सिल्वर एज वेल इन द पोर्टफोलियो. कितना परसेंटेज तक होना चाहिए? एंड इज इट पॉसिबल दैट गोल्ड एंड सिल्वर एक साथ ही कोई फंड में हो, एफओएफ में हो, उस तरीके भी हम लोग कर सकते हैं क्या? व्हाट आर द डिफरेंट ways that I can balance my, asset allocation?
So, very interesting question, Neeraj. I think it has a multifaceted answer. एक तरीके से
Mhm.
मतलब बहुत ही it's a very beautiful question in a manner of speaking कि कहाँ और कैसे होना चाहिए. तो देखिए
Mhm.
जैसे मान लीजिए somebody is in their 40s, in their 50s, and it is a very equity heavy portfolio they hold. Then
Mhm.
from their perspective, probably buffering that portfolio or buffering the equity risk from a drawdown is more important. So for them, gold would make slightly more sense than even silver. For
Correct.
somebody who has probably a very real estate heavy portfolio, but is probably on the higher bracket of that age spectrum, they can probably lean in a little bit more on silver because silver to a degree is slightly more pro-cyclical because of the industrial usage, which typically is correlated with strong equity performance. For
Mhm.
somebody who's much younger, who's just getting their journey started, they can probably blend the two together and get started. So the industry as a whole is evolving and is working towards having some structures where gold and silver can be offered together. Naturally, in the ETF format, you are focused on providing one singular product, तो वहाँ possible नहीं है. FOF के
Mhm.
फॉर्मेट में धीरे धीरे आई थिंक कोमिंगल प्रोडक्ट्स भी अवेलेबल हो रहे हैं. द इन्वेस्टर ऑल्सो हैज एन ऑप्शन कि आप दोनों प्रोडक्ट्स को इन वट एवर रेशियो यू फील कंफर्टेबल यू कोमिंगल. एज आई सेड, प्रॉब्ली पीपल जो ज्यादा इक्विटी ओरिएंटेड एक्सपोजर लेते हैं वो गोल्ड की तरफ रुझान रख सकते हैं, और जो लोग रियल एस्टेट की तरफ ज्यादा एक्सपोजर रखते हैं वो सिल्वर की तरफ थोड़ा ज्यादा रुझान ले सकते हैं. तो दोनों फॉर्मेट्स में जैसे आपका भी मान लीजिए रिस्क इवॉल्व हो रहा है एंड आपका
Mhm.
बाकी पोर्टफोलियो इवॉल्व हो रहा है, यू कैन ऐड गोल्ड एंड सिल्वर. Now, typically from a well-diversified portfolio perspective, when I think of an average Indian household, I think the average Indian household is carrying about
Mhm.
anywhere from 30 to 70% real estate exposure. Some of the younger generation who's coming out of their campuses today, who are beginning to start their journey independently, de-linked from the household, are probably leaning in a bit more towards the equity exposure. Over time, it may or may not get converted to real estate exposure. So I think for both of these, the asset allocation will be quite different. For somebody who's holding anywhere from 30 to 70% real estate, वो कितना ही गोल्ड और सिल्वर की तरफ और सेव कर सकते हैं इज द चैलेंजिंग बिट. बट आइडियली दे कैन ऑल्सो हैव एनीवेयर फ्रॉम 15 to 20-25% allocation towards these metal. As I said, leaning in perhaps a little bit more on silver because it does have a slightly pro-cyclical equity-like theme uh, at particularly good periods. And for somebody who's starting in very young and who's mainly getting started with the mutual fund journey, for them, perhaps getting started in equal proportion in gold and silver to something like 30-35% on the higher side is ample. They can probably bring that down depending on what kind of an equity basket they are holding. If the equity basket is a bit more risk on thematic, mid cap, small cap, they might want to add towards gold with a slightly higher allocation in percentage
Mhm.
term and then more of it towards gold. For somebody who's more, let's say, large cap, flexi cap, that kind of a setup, they can perhaps look to take slightly more silver than gold and a slightly overall lower allocation towards both those metals. So I think from a diversification perspective, that's how I would look at it. And I think aside from returns, the beauty of these metals is the diversification, is the store of value. And I think that's how investors should also look at it rather than look at the last 1 year, 2 year of returns and look to think that this rally or this sense of missing out is something that they should immediately solve for. I think putting it into perspective and then taking this exposure will probably give them better returns and definitely better peace of mind as they do begin the journey on this side.
So wonderful. So आपने बहुत बढ़िया तरीके से क्योंकि मिड कैप स्मॉल कैप और लार्ज कैप हेवी पोर्टफोलियो में किस तरीके का एलोकेशन होना चाहिए आई थिंक दैट इज ए प्रेटी इंसाइटफुल यू नो pointer for our investors. Now let's talk about tactical allocation time frame. Now definitely gold and silver investment, uh, gold is for long term, and how do you think is it what is that with respect to tactical nature of investing in gold and silver? Should it be? What should be the ideal time frame for both the metals?
So from a tactical perspective, typically if you expect, let's say, volatility in any major election which is upcoming, कि
Correct.
बहुत डाइवर्जेंट पॉलिसीज आएंगी दोनों गवर्नमेंट्स की, कोई एंटायरली नया बंदा आ सकता है पावर में, एंड द टू पीपल हु आर बैटलिंग इट आउट आर वेरी डाइवर्जेंट इन देयर ओपिनियंस इन एनी मेजर इकोनॉमी. It organically, yes, you'll think of the US when you think of it, but even today, China, India, and still some of the leading European countries also do fall under leading economies. So if there is a change which is coming there, then to a degree you can tactically allocate to gold before such a large change because the anticipated volatility will continue to rise in the event. जैसे हम आज के दिन देखते हैं इस टाइप के इवेंट की काफी कवरेज होती है मीडिया में, and
Correct.
organically with media covering it 24/7 almost, people who are listening to it are probably listening to two divergent opinions. What they walk away with is a sense that things might change one way or another quite dramatically. And at the back of our minds, we are all risk averse to a degree unless we see a lot of return associated with it. And nobody is associating a lot of return with a change of governance. That it takes time, the government will come into place. So I'm saying that before there are some periods where to a degree, luckily, we will be able to anticipate changes. If you are anticipating these changes, you can look to diversify in particular. If you are looking at the structural offtake, like we are seeing कि EV की ऑफ सेल्स बढ़ रही है, सोलर की डिमांड बढ़ रही है, हर साल जो गवर्नमेंट का पुश है इस डायरेक्शन में, जो ग्रीन एनर्जी की सब्सिडीज हैं वो स्टेबल हैं, then to a degree that tells us that not just in India but globally, and I say not just in India but globally because देखिए नीरज, एक रियलिटी है कि हम लोग एक emerging economy है आज के दिन. There are countries with bigger wallets, with thicker purses out there, and they are also proceeding in the same direction because to a degree, if the generations ahead have to continue in a peaceful way, they need the earth to be in a state where it is meaningfully and enjoyably habitable. So I think the green energy push is very real. Unless we change or we have a major global downturn, I think the push will remain. And if India is making meaningful strides in that direction, global economies also, if somebody is following those reports, will be able to see are making that transition. The demand from AI, etc. ये structural हैं. So if you have that appetite to ride this structural change, then to a degree, as I said, silver could be starting a new mega cycle as it stands today. I think we are all surprised by how well it has done in the last 6 months, 6 weeks, 6 days also. And this points to the fact that yes, valuations are definitely further ahead than where any of us anticipated them to be, but also tells us that what we thought of the prior structure may no longer be applicable in this world as it stands today. That a structural shift might be at play. So I think these are some of the things to be aware of when you are making these investment decisions. That if you can anticipate volatility, सर काफी चेंज आ रहा है कि ये जो मल्टीपोलर इकोनॉमी जिसकी मैं बात कर रहा हूँ ये किसी को लगता है काफी टाइम चलेगी आराम से सुलह नहीं होने वाली है उनके लिए इट इज अ गुड टाइम टू से दैट ठीक है यार मेरे पोर्टफोलियो में काफी सारे और जगह से रिस्क ऑन एसेट्स हैं आई कैन एलोकेट मोर सो इट कम्स डाउन इनटू व्हाट यू आर होल्डिंग व्हाट योर वर्ल्ड व्यू इज एंड ऑर्गेनिकली जैसे हम लोग भी एक वर्ल्ड व्यू बना रहे हैं बाकी इन्वेस्टर्स भी सभी लोग वर्ल्ड व्यू बना रहे हैं तो अगर जनरली वो वर्ल्ड व्यू जा रहा है इन द सेंस ऑफ कि वॉलेटिलिटी विल बी हाई देन इन पर्टिकुलर दैट इज योर टैक्टिकल बेट कि जब तक मुझे लगता है ये 4 महीने चलेगा 6 महीने चलेगा जब तक आई बिलीव द हेडलाइंस आर इन दिस डायरेक्शन आई कैन कंटिन्यू विद एन इंक्रीज्ड एलोकेशन देन आई विल टेपर इट ऑफ same way, if people want to ride with the wave, the silver wave is riding strong. It's already in a manner of time peaking. But is that peak a temporal correction that I can expect for a few weeks? Is it a structural wave ahead which is going to propel it further? Then it very much looks to be the case that this is a structural wave. I think the transition, the EMs, the leading EMs joining the green energy transition, the ईवी ट्रांजिशन ऑन एंड ऑफ चल रहा है बहुत सालों से यूएस में चल रहा है यूरोप में चल रहा है बट आई थिंक पिछले 4 साल में आई थिंक हमने इंडिया में भी एक मीनिंगफुल ट्रांजिशन सो ऑल ऑफ दीज आर पॉइंटिंग टुवर्ड्स द फैक्ट दैट द यूज ऑफ सिल्वर इन ऑल ऑफ दीज is a key driver which will take it forward. So I think this is a probably a silver, I would say, is a longer term bet as it stands today after the rally that's enjoyed. That structurally somebody who has a short term horizon can probably look to stay away from it a little bit. And then somebody who believes कि ठीक है, I have that horizon and I don't mind extending my tactical allocation to a few years because I believe that the narrative around silver has changed meaningfully, they can probably come in here a bit more bullishly. For people who believe कि ये जो geopolitical issues हैं, ये carry on करेंगे, probably for them tactically gold is a better choice.
Lovely. I think this part quite insightful. I think we can really make use of it. And you said interestingly that silver is just started a super cycle. In fact, there's a question. In fact, from one of our viewer. The question is anonymous. Actually, do gold and silver ETFs will spike in the coming month? He's talking about probably few months perspective, tactical perspective.
कहना मुश्किल है देखिए नीरज स्पाइक के पर्सपेक्टिव से as I said the metals have had a strong run up so from here they could continue to go up in a few days but definitely something will settle I don't think we are at a stage where unrest is breaking out beyond the stage organically we are I think from a continent perspective and a globe perspective we're in a slightly heightened state but it's not rapidly deteriorating as things stand today. It is reasonably managed. It's been teetering around the edges a little bit. So, expecting a very sharp change in that narrative is probably, I can't call it pessimistic or optimistic, given कि आपको दोनों को balance करना है, but it is unlikely. So I think more than the immediate returns, I think looking at the overall allocation of how you hold it
Exactly.
and what do you जो आप क्या चाहना कि मतलब चाहने के पर्सपेक्टिव से both of these metals चाहना कि ये हम लें और ये डबल हो जाए साल में I think वो अनरियल की तरफ है from a more
Absolutely.
logical perspective, the diversification narrative, I think, is the better way to look at it. We can see a stage where, let's say, two or three major economies come and make peace. And then definitely that will kind of take the pressure off of gold. Inflation is not at an all-time high. It's not at an all-time low, but it is at a reasonable median. So there aren't a lot of factors to say, जब गोल्ड अब इस साइकिल में चलना शुरू हुआ था तो शुरू में काफी इन्फ्लेशन थी फिर काफी सारा सेंट्रल बैंक की बाइंग चली फिर अभी ये जियोपॉलिटिकल ट्रेड वॉर्स वगैरह के चक्कर में भी अच्छी रन अप चल रही है बट सम ऑफ दीज थिंग्स आर नाउ स्ट्रक्चरली एट parity or have been agreed. So what the next thing could be which can propel gold further is lying ahead of us. But as things stand, all of these things are not breaking down together. While central banks are buying, while retail demand is slow, जब आप सोचते हैं ज्वेलरी कंजम्पशन के perspective से, so the reality is with gold, which is being priced now almost, let's say, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70% from whatever horizon you want to look at. जो बंदा पहले मान लीजिए एक्स कैरेट ज्वेलरी लेता था वाई ग्राम्स में, वो आज के दिन सोचेगा यार मैं थोड़ा कम लेके भी चला लूं, बिकॉज खर्चा तो एट द एंड ऑफ द डे क्योंकि प्राइस अप्रिशिएट हो गई है उतना ही हो रहा है. सो द डिमांड फ्रॉम सम ऑफ द सोर्सेज व्हिच आर लेट्स से डिस्क्रिशनरी, लाइक आई सेड ज्वेलरी इज अ बिग डिमांड ड्राइवर, इज डिस्क्रिशनरी. That will probably cool off a little bit. So I think people need to be aware of the fact also that while the run up has been great and the prospects look good, बट टू एक्सपेक्ट कि ये एक महीने में बहुत ऊपर चला जाएगा इज क्वाइट अनरियल. दैट इज दैट सेंस ऑफ ट्राइंग टू कैच दैट ट्रेन विच माइट हैव ऑलरेडी लेफ्ट द स्टेशन. So I think don't look to necessarily follow that path. Take a more staggered approach कि ये मैं add करना यहाँ शुरू कर रहा हूँ. How do I want to look at accumulating this for the next year? What is the total percentage I want to allocate towards this asset class? Knowing that this asset class does well in a decadal period, does well in a 5 year period, typically does remarkably well in a 15-year period if you are able to catch the highs. तो 15 साल में टिपिकली एक ना एक ऐसा साइकिल आता है गोल्ड और सिल्वर का जब वो इक्विटी मार्केट्स के हेड होते हैं. सो हैविंग दैट पर्सपेक्टिव इज प्रॉब्ली द बेटर वे टू अप्रोच इट वेयर वी स्टैंड टुडे.
Absolutely. So upfront, realistic expectation setting is very important. And as I said, that instead of looking for short-term benefits, have a total overall asset allocation kind of a goal, long-term perspective. Deepak, again, let's talk about risk as well. Uh, you have been talking, in fact, in between. What is the biggest risk that you see for gold and silver in the coming years or coming months?
तो इन द लेट्स सो फ्रॉम अ रिस्क पर्सपेक्टिव पहले एक बार गोल्ड की बात कर सकते हैं कि लेट्स से साहब जो मेन रीजंस रहे हैं, सेंट्रल बैंक बाइंग कम हो जाती है.
Mm-hmm.
सेंट्रल बैंक बाइंग कम होने के चांसेस आर लिमिटेड,
Mm,
probably limited, because the shift there seems structural.
mm,
Smaller central banks across Asia, smaller central banks across Africa, smaller central banks across South America have
mm,
all shown a meaningful uptick in
mm,
their purchase of gold. So it's not like one or two or three leading central banks leading the charge and everybody
mm,
in the other direction. Uh, वो जो कहते हैं ना almost in picks and pockets across the board वो थोड़ा सा uptick है. So I don't think that is going to change. But yes, that is naturally a risk. Inflation completely cooling off, that is a
mm,
risk. But again, from a likelihood perspective, that happening is limited because
mm,
the demand on freight, the demand on, let's say, the changing duties and the changing import structure and the new trade routes being kind of disrupted a little bit. I think all of that is going to hold up inflation somewhere where it is today, probably 1% above, 1% below. But I don't
mm,
necessarily see inflation falling off a cliff.
mm,
नियर शोरिंग हैज स्टार्टेड, जैसे आपने देखा होगा या सुना होगा कि we are not, it's not just us who's saying make in India today because India has a cost advantage. A lot of countries globally, even if they don't have a cost advantage, are looking to nearshore. Nearshoring
mm,
organically brings up the cost, doesn't bring it down, because you are taking a higher cost base to start manufacturing it closer to you to stoke your economy, etc. And a lot of leading economies are going in that direction. So I don't think inflation is going to fall off a cliff. So I think OB, while it is a risk, it's not a major risk. What I see as a risk, and I think मैंने थोड़ी देर पहले इसके बारे में हल्का सा टच अपॉन करा था,
mm,
कि geopolitical unrest I don't believe can remain at this elevated level to perpetuity. Somebody somewhere will look to make peace to move on, because I think all of us as a species, हम लोगों को ये मूव ऑन की फिलॉसफी है कि यार बढ़ना है आगे, कोई ना कोई रास्ता
mm,
निकाल के हम लोग सब चलना चाहते हैं. तो कुछ
Correct.
टाइम सुलह नहीं हो रही तो वो चलता है, बट आई डोंट थिंक वी हैव बीन एवर एज अ स्पीशीज फॉर डेकेड्स टुगेदर एट वॉर, लाइक
Mm,
दैट इज जस्ट नॉट समथिंग वी डू। नहीं तो हम लोग आज
mm,
यहाँ नहीं पहुंच पाए होते। So I think
correct.
that narrative, I think, will cool off, and I think that will cool off gold a little bit as well.
Mm,
So that is the one where I do see that there is some downside exposure there. That if things rapidly stabilize, and
mm,
when I say rapidly, for everybody, that's a very subjective word कि वो rapid क्या होता है सर? वो एक महीना होता है,
mm,
6 महीना होता है, 2 साल होता है, 10 दिन होता है, क्या होता है? वो कितना rapid है will probably determine the course. But if it is this protracted, heightened, elevated, sensitive kind of an environment, then to a degree, it might also not be a detractor, it might be a tailwind. But if it
mm,
does settle, it might become a headwind for gold. Now, with that said, I
mm,
think on silver also I touched upon the green energy transition is probably the biggest factor. The use towards chips and AI is a big factor. Pharma adoption is a big factor. Now the investment demand is also is a big factor. But there as well, to a degree, if let's say the GDP globally comes crushing down, something like a pandemic hits and growth really gets staved off. In that case, to a degree, what we'll observe is that the focus on green energy can shift. We can be like, we want our global GDP to rise. We,
mm,
as countries, we are all striving for a bigger share of that pie. So people be like, I want to make that transition, but I'll probably delay it by a decade because I want to, let's say, stabilize my boat first. So I think something like that can shift it away. Again, the likelihood of that is lesser. So that's why I feel that silver, from a longer term perspective, is a structural change, because these changes where the industrial demand is consuming the silver
mm,
that's being produced, I think that tells the fact कि ये none of these sources are at a stage where they are maturing. I think we are still in the first leg of this transition, and there are
mm,
multiple legs ahead of us. At what pace these legs come is very much dependent on how we do as a global economy, how some of the countries who are at the forefront of this are doing. But I think that change is very much ahead of us. And how it plays out, whether it plays out in a 2 year, 4 year, 8 year, 10 year, 20 year horizon, remains to be seen. But I think across longer horizon, it is a change that is now in place, and it will play out. It will play out. And the time
mm.
is something that I think all of us will figure and see कि ये थोड़ा कम टाइम लगा देना है anticipated या थोड़ा ज्यादा लग गया. But the
Correct.
change is undeniably here and it is here to stay, I believe.
Wonderful. There's a question from Sandeep. He said, how to get started, which ETF to select, and on what criteria?
So I think Sandeep, that is a great question again. So देखिए, there are 2 or 3 things that I think end investors should consider. While all ETFs are fairly similar products across AMCs, हम लोग सब regulated entities हैं, as you understand. Guidelines typically come from SEBI, and the products are structured with their blessing. There are only small differences across the offerings. While these small differences also very much matter for the experienced investor. So let's take a closer look. So I think जो फर्स्ट और मोस्ट एविडेंट डिफरेंस होता है वो होता है आपका परफॉर्मेंस, कि हाउ आर यू डूइंग इन द 1 year, हाउ आर यू डूइंग इन द 3 year, हाउ आर यू डूइंग इन द 5 year. ये आप टिपिकली नैव के बेसिस पे देख सकते हैं कि 1 साल में नैव का क्या रिटर्न है, 3 साल में क्या है, 5 साल में क्या है. That gives you a feel for which funds are doing well. काफी बार ऐसा होता है जब आप नाव के पर्सपेक्टिव से देखेंगे तो वो एक्सपेंसेस में लिंकअप हो जाता है. सो एएमसीज हु आर स्लाइटली मोर कॉम्पिटिटिव इन देयर ऑफरिंग
Mm,
will come up on top. Incidentally, both of these products, we have fairly compelling and cost competitive offerings out there, and we do appear on some of the performance charts depending on what horizon you are looking at. But that
mm,
aside, that is a good way to look at it कि कौन है जो बेसिकली यहाँ पे अच्छा लो कॉस्ट स्टेबल प्रोडक्ट लेके आ रहे हैं. नेक्स्ट थिंग इन ईटीएफ दैट somebody can look at it to a degree, and these are again two linked factors, कि क्या मेरा लिक्विडिटी है, क्या वॉल्यूम है, क्या इम्पैक्ट कॉस्ट है, क्या एयूएम है. So this is all also typically a linked affair. Usually आपका AUM थोड़ा ज्यादा होता है तो लिक्विडिटी थोड़ी ज्यादा होती है, typically transacted volume थोड़ी ज्यादा होती है. So I think one is performance and fee, other one is liquidity and AUM. For people who are looking to trade in and out a bit more frequently, probably the liquidity and the AUM and the average daily traded volume are meaningful metrics. For people who are probably holding it for the longer term, for them long-term performance, expense, etc. is more material. So I think these are the two broad buckets where you can place them in your consideration set and say कि ये दो मेरे consideration set है. My personal guide would be that if I'm looking to move in and out quickly and quite often, I'd favor the liquidity and the AUM bucket. And if I'm probably looking at it in the longer term, I look at it from the performance and fee bucket. So I think that is the best guide. Often different platforms that are there today already have some of these built into their metrics when they suggest products. Depending on what your demand is or what your expectation or investment horizon is, you can independently evaluate and kind of see what makes sense for you as an investor.
Absolutely. I think this question beautifully answered in details. Sandeep, I think you got your answer. I think we'll take a last question. Question is from Arohi. She's asking, with cryptocurrency also creating an interest among youth, do you think Indian government should consider it as a scope for investing, giving competition to gold and silver in the future? Maybe.
बहुत ही ना, मतलब ऐसे गूगली लगता है, बट इनफैक्ट उतना गूगली नहीं है शायद. सो आई थिंक, सो देखिए, लिटिल बिट ऑफ बैकग्राउंड अबाउट मी, आई जस्ट गेट इनटू इट. मैं कुछ साल पहले तक यूएस में था, एंड देयर आर
Mhm.
लॉट ऑफ पीपल. जैसे आई थिंक इस मीटिंग में भी किसी ने या इस सेशन में भी किसी ने पूछा कि सर अगले महीने में गोल्ड चला जाएगा क्या, ले लेना चाहिए क्या, बिल्कुल सही टाइम है एकदम, मतलब बढ़िया रिटर्न आएंगे क्या. See types, I think there's a whole host of people globally and particularly in the Americas where Bitcoin is now mainstream in a manner of speaking. जो सोच रहे हैं कि यार मिस हो गया, ले लेना चाहिए था,
Mm.
मिस हो गया, ले लेना चाहिए था. एंड ये कॉमन फीलिंग होती है. देखिए, दिस इज जस्ट ह्यूमन नेचर. देयर इज नो डिबेटिंग इट, देयर इज नो देयर इज नो एस्केपिंग इट आल्सो. It is very much inherently ingrained in who we are and will always be there. आई थिंक सोशल मीडिया इसी को फोमो बनाता है एंड हम लोग फिर उसी में थोड़ा कभी बह जाते हैं.
Yes,
बट जोक्स
definitely.
असाइड, कमिंग बैक टू द क्वेश्चन, I
Mm.
think a lot of people have, in a manner of speaking, started to look beyond their currency. And when you look at the US investment landscape in particular, the takeoff of uh, Bitcoin, of stable coins, of Ethereum, all points towards the fact that the investment perspective of investors is evolving, and it's evolving beyond their home currency to a degree. And are gold and silver also, in a manner of speaking, a currency? Yes, very much they are. So there is a sense of perpetuity here as well. So there is a linked or a rub-off effect where you can see that, okay, while these secondary or tertiary currencies that are becoming somewhat relevant in the global landscape today are a lot more volatile, gold and silver also to a degree help you de-link from country or currency exposure a little bit and are less volatile. Organically, because they are a lot more broad based, they will never have the same kind of return journey as some of these small narrow based currencies can have, or digital formats of crypto can have. But to a degree, the genesis of crypto, of having something that extends beyond borders, extend and can act as a store of value against any geopolitical or local domestic issues. I think some of the genesis of what makes crypto attractive is also what makes gold and silver attractive. The return journey and the volatility will be dramatically different across these two, but they are closer than what we think of when you think of them from a diversifying factor. They do offer somewhat, and not high correlation, but somewhat correlated outputs under certain specific stress criteria. But I think from a broad-based perspective, they are quite different. If equity markets are doing very poorly, I don't think crypto can hold off in independence unless the reasons are very specific to the equity markets. In most of them, crypto will show a slightly higher wall compared to equities in a drawdown situation. But I think gold and silver can meaningfully withstand that. Naturally, on the upside, also, sometimes you can have equity markets in 2, 3 years of good returns, but probably gold and silver might lag. I think जब मैं gold और silver को देखता हूँ तो one of the perspective that I think of is कि अगर equity markets बुरे गए हैं तो typically I'm expecting an outsized returns और 2, 3 साल अगर equity markets अच्छे चले गए हैं then people start to get a little bit like कि यार ये शायद थोड़ा टॉपी हो रहा है I want to diversify then gold and silver in a third or fourth year typically again see an outsized catch up क्योंकि 2 or 3 years those are in a manner of speaking the way to look at it and I diverted off from the crypto question entirely but I think जो एक tactical allocation का भी सवाल था वो कहीं से मेरे दिमाग में घूमता फिरता आ गया तो मैंने सोचा उसको एक बार राउंड ऑफ कर दिया जाए
नहीं,
so
I think आप आई थिंक आपने बिल्कुल बहुत इंसाइटफुल तरीके से इसको अपना आंसर किया, टोटल 360 डिग्री व्यू लेके. I think we had a great discussion, Deepak ji. Fantastic discussion. And you have given lot many insights, lot many ideas, whether कोई start करना चाहते हैं or somebody in the middle of the investment journey. I think he has lots of things to take home from this discussion. Again, wishing you and all our participants a great time, great Diwali. And this week onwards, we have seen lots of optimism back to the market. Things are looking good. So I think with that, I'd like to close the program today. Thank you, Deepakji.
thank you so much, Neeraj, and it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks everybody who could join in.
Thank you.
Investments in the securities market are subject to market risk. Read all